The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before us, a barren sea of red rock and cacti under the oppressive summer sun. It was the kind of heat that could melt the soles of your boots if you weren't careful. The four of us, me, Jenna, Mike, and Luke, had planned this trip for months, a chance to escape the monotony of our lives and spend a couple of days exploring the desert's stark beauty. We'd even brought my dog, Scout, a wiry mutt with enough energy to outrun any of us. We were near the Mogollon Rim, an area where the desert bled into thick stretches of pine forest. The locals called it a strange place, the kind that bred whispers and campfire stories. Back home in Texas, we had our own share of strange tales, but this part of Arizona had a reputation. Old legends about creatures lurking in the shadows of the woods. I remembered reading a few of them in one of those yellowed, sensational newspapers, the kind you only find at gas stations. Werewolves. Not the Hollywood kind, but something primal. Something ancient. The day's hike had been brutal. The heat bore down on us without mercy, and by the time we found a decent clearing to set up camp, I felt like my legs were made of lead. Scout flopped down in the shade, panting heavily, his tongue lolling out of his mouth. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The temperature dropped quickly, the air turning crisp and dry. We built a fire, its glow pushing back the encroaching darkness. Jenna was telling some story about her last camping trip when Scout's ears perked up. He let out a low growl, his hackles rising. "What is it, boy?" I asked, scanning the edge of the clearing. The firelight didn't reach far, and the shadows beyond seemed to deepen with every passing second. We all fell silent, listening. The desert had its own kind of quiet, filled with the hum of insects and the occasional rustle of a breeze through the brush. But now it was different. There was a stillness that felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl, so deep it seemed to vibrate through the ground. Scout barked, his voice sharp and frantic. Jenna and Mike exchanged nervous glances, while Luke reached for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. "Probably a coyote," Mike said, but his voice lacked conviction. Coyotes didn't sound like that. The growl came again, closer this time, and we caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. A pair of glowing eyes stared at us from the darkness, their amber light unnatural and unblinking. The creature stepped forward, just enough for the firelight to catch it. It was huge, its body covered in coarse, matted fur. Its shoulders hunched unnaturally, and its long limbs ended in clawed hands. But the face, that was the worst part. It was a grotesque blend of human and wolf with a muzzle full of sharp yellow teeth. "What the hell is that?" Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. The creature didn't charge. Instead, it prowled around the edge of the clearing, its eyes never leaving us. It was toying with us, like a cat with a cornered mouse. Scout barked again, but this time the sound was cut off as the creature let out a deafening roar. It was a sound that froze the blood in my veins. Without warning, it lunged, its speed a blur. Scout darted forward, barking furiously, but the creature swiped him aside like he was nothing. Jenna screamed, and Mike grabbed a burning log from the fire, swinging it wildly. The creature snarled, retreating just enough to keep out of reach. "We have to get out of here," Luke said, his voice shaking. But where could we go? The desert at night was a labyrinth of shadows, and the creature was faster, stronger. Still, staying here wasn't an option. We grabbed what we could, knives, a flashlight, and a first aid kit, and ran. Scout limped behind us, whimpering but still moving. The creature didn't follow immediately. It was almost as if it wanted us to run. The desert was eerily quiet as we moved, our footsteps crunching on the dry earth. We stuck close together, every sound making us jump. The creature's growls echoed around us, coming from different directions, as if it was circling. At one point, we found a rocky outcrop and huddled there, trying to catch our breath. Scout lay at my feet, his sides heaving. I stroked his fur, whispering reassurances I didn't believe. "I should have stayed in Texas," I muttered, thinking of my family. My dad had always been a steady presence, the kind of man who could make you feel safe even when the world was falling apart. I wished he was here now. The creature found us again. This time it didn't wait. It charged, and we scattered, running blindly through the darkness. I heard Jenna scream, followed by a sickening thud. I didn't look back. I couldn't. By some miracle, we found a narrow ravine and squeezed into it. The walls were high enough to offer some protection, and we moved as quietly as we could. The creature's growls faded, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was hunting us, and it was patient. Hours passed. The night seemed endless. We crept through the ravine, every step deliberate and silent. The calm night air felt suffocating, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Finally, as the first hints of dawn painted the sky, we stumbled onto a dirt road. A truck was coming down the path, its headlights piercing the gloom. We flagged it down, practically throwing ourselves in front of it. The driver, a grizzled old man, took one look at us and nodded. "Get in," he said. We didn't ask questions. As the truck rumbled away, I looked back. The creature was there, standing at the edge of the woods, watching us. Its eyes glowed in the early light, and for a moment I thought it might follow, but it didn't. It just stood there, its massive form blending into the trees as the truck carried us to safety. The rain was relentless, a steady drumbeat on the hood of the car. The wipers scraped across the windshield, barely clearing the view of the winding forest road ahead. Autumn in Maine had a way of feeling oppressive, with dark clouds hanging low and the trees casting long shadows even during the day. Our road trip had been smooth until the car sputtered, coughed, and finally died. A busted radiator, or so it seemed. None of us were mechanics. It was me, Dean Oldman, my dog Chase, and my two friends, Sarah and Tom. We'd pulled over to the side of a desolate stretch of road, miles from the nearest town. Chase, a mutt with floppy ears and an eager personality, barked at the rain from the back seat. I was frustrated, but being a police officer, I was used to dealing with unexpected situations. However, I wasn't in New Orleans anymore, where the humid nights and lively streets could turn even the worst moods into something tolerable. Maine's wilderness was isolating, quiet, and unnerving. Sarah tried calling for help, but there was no signal, typical for the middle of nowhere. We decided to wait out the storm and figure things out in the morning. I grabbed my flashlight, Chase's leash, and a few blankets, and we set up camp just off the road, under a cluster of trees that offered some shelter from the rain. Tom managed to get a fire going, and we huddled around it, the orange glow our only comfort against the encroaching dark. As the fire crackled, my mind wandered. I thought of my family back home, my dad's stories about his own hiking trips, my mom's constant reminder to stay safe. They'd probably roll their eyes at me now, stranded with no backup plan. I smiled despite myself. Then again, I'd watched enough YouTube videos about Bigfoot sightings in places like this to know that Maine was prime territory for those kinds of tales. They were fun to watch, but never something I took seriously. Chase's growl snapped me out of my thoughts. He stood rigid, his ears perked, staring into the trees. "What is it, boy?" I asked, standing and grabbing the flashlight. The others went quiet, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. I shined the light into the woods, but the beam barely penetrated the thick underbrush. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow too large to be an animal. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Probably a deer," Tom said, his voice lacking conviction. "Deer don't make Chase act like this," I muttered. Chase barked once, sharp and loud, before falling silent again, his gaze fixed on the same spot. Then we heard it, a low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a grunt. It came from somewhere in the darkness, and it wasn't the sound of any animal I'd ever encountered. The firelight flickered, and the shadows seemed to deepen. "Okay, that's not a deer," Sarah whispered, clutching her jacket tighter. The sound came again, closer this time. A branch snapped, and I caught a glimpse of something massive moving between the trees. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I swung it around, finally landing on a pair of glowing eyes. It was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its face was a twisted amalgamation of man and beast, with wide, piercing eyes and a mouth full of jagged teeth. Bigfoot. I'd laughed at the videos before, but seeing it now, all I felt was cold terror. "Run!" I yelled, but before we could move, the creature lunged forward, its speed defying its size. Chase barked furiously, straining against his leash as I held him back. The thing swiped at the fire, scattering embers and sending shadows dancing wildly around us. We scrambled to grab our things, but there was no time to think. The creature let out a roar, so loud it seemed to shake the ground. Tom grabbed a burning branch and swung it at the beast, forcing it to back off momentarily. We bolted, Chase leading the way. The rain had turned the ground into a muddy mess, making every step a struggle. I could hear the creature crashing through the woods behind us, its growls mixing with the sound of the storm. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline pushing me forward. We ran for what felt like hours, slipping and stumbling through the dense forest. Sarah tripped at one point, twisting her ankle. I hoisted her up, my training kicking in as I scanned for any sign of the creature. The rain masked its movements, but I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond sight. Finally, we reached a clearing where an old logging road cut through the trees. It was our only chance. "Stay together," I said, my voice firm despite the fear gnawing at me. We followed the road, moving as quickly as Sarah's injury would allow. The creature's growls grew distant, but I knew better than to think we were safe. Bigfoot wasn't just a legend. It was real, and it was hunting us. As dawn broke, the rain began to ease, and we stumbled onto a paved road. A pickup truck appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the mist. I waved it down, nearly collapsing in relief when it stopped. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, looked us over and didn't ask any questions. "Get in," he said, and we didn't need to be told twice. As we drove away, I looked back. The forest loomed behind us, silent and still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Bigfoot was out there, and we were lucky to have made it out alive. The rain was falling in heavy sheets, soaking the Wyoming wilderness and muffling every sound. I could hear the water trickling off leaves and into the underbrush, blending with the crackling fire we had managed to build under a makeshift tarp. It was supposed to be a simple hunting trip, a way to unwind with friends. Instead, it turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. My name is Arnold Oldman, and I'm a firefighter from Denver. I grew up surrounded by the Rocky Mountains, learning to respect the wild while also developing a knack for strategy, something I honed over long nights playing Warhammer 40K. I brought my dog Chase, a mutt with a glossy black coat and a nose for trouble. Along with me were my friends, Ethan and Luke, seasoned hunters who had talked me into joining them. We'd set out early that morning, the sky overcast but not yet threatening rain. By noon, the storm rolled in. It was unrelenting, drenching us as we trudged deeper into the woods, rifles slung over our shoulders. The forest felt alive, but not in the comforting way I remembered from my childhood trips. Something about the dense thickets and towering pines felt wrong, like we were being watched. Chase was the first to pick up on it. He stopped in his tracks, his ears swiveling and nose twitching. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, kneeling to pat him. His body was rigid, his gaze fixed on a patch of trees up ahead. "He probably smells a deer," Ethan said, but there was doubt in his voice. I tightened my grip on my rifle. "Maybe," I replied, though my gut told me otherwise. I'd seen a TV show once about wendigos, cannibalistic creatures from native folklore said to stalk the wilderness. They were supposed to be emaciated with long limbs and hollow eyes, their hunger unending. It was just a story, but out here, under the oppressive weight of the storm, it didn't feel so far-fetched. The first sign something was wrong came a few hours later. We found tracks, hoof prints in the mud, but they weren't normal. They were too large, with claw-like impressions at the edges. Chase sniffed at them and whimpered, backing away. "That's not a deer," Luke muttered, his usual bravado gone. We followed the tracks, curiosity overriding our better judgment. The forest grew darker, the rain heavier, and the air colder. Then we saw it, a figure hunched and gaunt, standing just at the edge of the clearing. It looked wrong, its limbs too long and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The firelight reflected in its eyes, and I swear they glowed. "What the hell is that?" Ethan breathed, his voice barely audible. The creature turned its head toward us, its movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. Then it let out a screech, a sound that cut through the storm and pierced straight to my bones. It charged, faster than anything that size should be able to move. We scattered, instinct taking over. Chase barked furiously as I yanked him by the leash, running blindly through the trees. I could hear Luke shouting, a gunshot ringing out, but it did nothing to deter the thing. It was on us, a blur of claws and teeth. Luke went down first. I saw the creature swipe at him, tearing into his side. His scream was drowned out by the storm. Ethan fired again, this time hitting it square in the chest, but it barely flinched. It turned to him, its hollow eyes narrowing. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. Chase and I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. We found a small rock outcropping and huddled beneath it, the rain cascading down like a curtain. I checked my phone, no signal. My mind raced. Luke was gone, Ethan probably too, and that thing was still out there. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the feeling that we were being stalked. I kept the fire going, knowing it was a double-edged sword. It provided warmth and light, but also gave away our position. Chase pressed against me, his body trembling. I thought of my family back in Denver. My sister used to joke that I was too brave for my own good, always diving headfirst into danger. She wasn't wrong. But this wasn't a burning building or a car wreck. This was something I couldn't explain, couldn't fight. By dawn, the rain had eased, and I knew we had to move. The creature hadn't attacked again, but I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. We made our way back toward where we'd parked, sticking to the denser parts of the forest for cover. When we finally reached the car, I almost cried with relief. Ethan was there, slumped against the door, bloodied but alive. "Luke didn't make it," he rasped, his voice hollow. We didn't wait to find out if the creature was still following. I threw Chase into the back seat, helped Ethan into the passenger seat, and floored it. The tires spun in the mud before catching, and we sped down the dirt road, the forest blurring past. Even now, I don't know what we saw out there. The authorities didn't believe our story, chalking it up to a bear attack, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't human. It was something else, something that still haunts my dreams.